Now let's go through Paul's life again. He says in here, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths or near death often. From the Jews 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. And it was the custom then that you could hit a man with 39 lashes, 40 lashes, but to make sure they didn't miscount, the Jews would only allow 39. Now think about that. They were afraid they'd miscount and break the law and hit a guy 41 times, so they decided to make it 39, and if they were one off, it'd only be 40, and it'd be fine. Can you imagine what Paul's back looked like? If you were hit, whatever that is, almost 200 times with a lash that had rocks and glass and little things. Normally that wouldn't just be a single lash. It'd be what I think it was called a flagellum, and it would have a handle maybe 18 inches long. It'd have 3 rawhide strands perhaps that came out of it with things tied in the end. When they hit your back with that, it was meant to gouge skin out. It wasn't meant to raise a welt. It was meant to make you bleed. And that happened, and you can imagine after he'd been beaten the first 2 times in his life, and they healed up, and the scars, he'd had all the scar tissue. Can you imagine the next time when that scar tissue is hit? Listen, this didn't happen over a period of 40 years. This is a relatively short time, and he's suffering. And remember, tradition says that he's going to be beheaded in Rome eventually after he suffers more imprisonment. It's really, God permits it. Why? He called him to suffer. God permits you to suffer at the hands of the world. Why? Well, it's part of the proof that you're a Christian, frankly. From the Jews, I received these 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods, sort of sticks or bamboo rod types of things where they would beat you. I know that in the book of Acts there is a mention of one time. Obviously Paul had a more varied experience than we see in the book of Acts. Once I was stoned. If you remember, he's stoned in Asia Minor and left for dead. They'd stoned him so thoroughly they thought he was dead. And he got back up and went back into the city. That tells you something about his fortitude by God's grace. 3 times I was shipwrecked. In the scriptures, I can only find 1 time that he was shipwrecked. And it was a different time here than I think he's even talking about. So we have times that in the book of Acts they don't record some of the hardships Paul went through because, remember, the book of Acts is some of the acts of some of the apostles. Some of the acts of some of the apostles. It's not meaning in the book of Acts to describe every bit of suffering or every confrontation these people had. It's just giving you a summary. Paul's giving us a little more detail. I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been in the deep. In journeys often, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen. Why? The Jews hated him for deserting them and becoming a Christian. They hated him. If you remember, when they would see him, a great crisis would arise every time practically because they charged him with being sort of treasonous to them. Perils of the Gentiles, and perils in the city, and perils in the wilderness. If you're in peril in the wilderness and in peril in the city, where else do you think there is to be? He's trying to tell you that he was always in peril. Among the Jews, among the Gentiles, in the city, out of the city, amongst church members, for goodness sake. It's just amazing. In the sea, among false brethren. He had a lot of people in the church who were false brethren. Now today, every time I say that, people get offended that I would make such a statement that the church is full of false brethren. Well, the Apostle Paul tells you in nearly every book in the New Testament that the tares and the wheat grow up together. In every church there are brethren and there are false brethren. That's not a peculiar thing, that's a normal thing. So you have to reckon that in your church the same is going to be true. You should prize the brethren and not be surprised at the attitudes and actions of the false brethren. We see it all the time. We have good friends in Chicago who just left a pastorate to go to one in California, and it would sadden you to know how the people treated his departure, who happens to be the best man I've seen in the pulpit in my life. But you know why? We said to him, It's natural. They're just being themselves. They're false brethren in the church. You've taught them every Sunday, but they're false brethren. You should have expected it from them. I don't know if that helped him. Seemed like it did. Seemed like it comforted him. He thanked us for it, at least. He says, besides the other things, what come upon me daily, my deep concern for all the churches. Look, Paul had a much fuller plate than I could have. No wonder he didn't have time for a pretty wife. No wonder he didn't think about life the way that I do, where I'm still trying to own a piece of this life. As I try to tell myself and you every week, this life is only consequential in how it affects our next life. In and of itself, nothing is greater folly than to strive to be rich or famous or something with real meaning in this world. This world has no real meaning. You're a vapor. You're here a moment. The only thing that counts is how it affects your next life. And if you remember, we're pilgrims and strangers, it said in Hebrews 11. Pilgrims and strangers. Count yourself to be a pilgrim if you're really a Christian. And if that makes you mad, perhaps you're just a pretender. I didn't say it, if you remember. This is the Scriptures, the infallible Scriptures telling you this. So we come back, we'll see that it's natural for our heroes, faithful and Christian, to be besmeared and beaten and put in a cage, and we'll see what their end result is. Thanks.
As I traveled on my journey, few and far between.
You know, as we wind down here, I have asked Lois to sit with me now. I don't have a microphone for Lois. Otherwise, I probably would let her talk. Maybe not. But I'm thinking about it. I'm still under advisement. But since she doesn't have a microphone, I'll do the talking. I just like her to be sitting next to me because I like Lois, you know. Now, these guys, Vanity Fair, the trial is about to begin. And let me read you a little poem that Bunyan had put in the bottom of this little account. Now, faithful, play the man. Speak for thy God. Fear not the wicked's malice, nor their rod. Speak boldly, man. The truth is on thy side. Die for it, and to life and triumph ride. You see, this is a short time. It's supposed to be a warfare here. If we're not undergoing much suffering, and I really am not, it may be because I'm just not plain enough about it. Maybe having a TV show that says plain talk about life in the Bible doesn't mean you're plain enough. Or maybe God's just waiting to allow these things to sort of erupt in my world. I don't know. I'd like to think that I'm being plain with you. I try to be plain when I'm walking around during the day. But the kind of mistreatment I receive is so mild that it's almost congratulatory. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I just know if we're standing up for the truth, even in your church, there ought to be some sort of a division over it. If you have complete unity in your church, you either have a church of two, or you are not doing your job probably in speaking up, because people will bring up all sorts of issues at church, and maybe we let them fight over the color of the carpet when we should just tell them that that's nonsense and to stop. That'll get you in trouble enough, let alone over any doctrinal things. Now, they come to this, and you're going to see that the final charge they levy against these two men, our heroes, is that they promote disloyal notions. Disloyal notions to whom? To the prince of this world. In this case, Beelzebub. Disloyal notions about what? Faith and holiness are disloyal notions to this world. Faith that God exists, faith that the Christian God is the only God, faith that God requires something, faith that the Scriptures are infallible, faith that you need to lead a holy life and not just talk about leading a holy life. Those are all things that run counter to what the world preaches. They're disloyal notions. And I was thinking of 1 John 2:15. You remember, do not love this world, nor the things of this world. The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life. They're all things that make you an enemy of God. There is a war going on between light and dark, truth and falsehood, God's way of telling you how the world works and the world's way of telling you how the world works. You're going to find, if you're really a stout Christian, that sometimes people are going to mock you because you won't join in. Just as I told you that crude joke the guy told me. The minute you lightly reprove them for it, they're unhappy with you. Well, they should be. You must lightly reprove them, and they should be unhappy. Why? They don't think like you. You just showed how ugly it is the way they really are. That guy exposed his heart to you, and you're telling him your heart's no good. That's usually the way that God does things to convert a man, frankly. A man must see how black his heart is before God can let him see how bright and light the truth is. Okay? A man must find himself wanting, and these people haven't. They charge him with disloyal notions. They're about to decide to beat them some more, put them in the stocks, and they're going to execute faithful. Our man Christian's going to escape by God's providence, but you're going to see it. And here's what they're preaching in that town. Two things. One of them is salvation by works. And that's, faith is an antidote to that. And if you remember, if you think that your works, that you've done better in life than you've done bad, if it's a weighing things in a balance, listen, that's something you got from the Cracker Jack box. There's no truth to that. Throw that out. You haven't done a single thing that's righteous in your life. Even the best things you do need to be covered by the blood of Christ. If you think you're going to give an account to God where you're going to talk about the good things you did, forget it. It's a losing proposition. Tune in next week, and I'll continue in this vein and try to destroy that notion for you. Thanks.
Traveled on my journey, few and far between, were the pilgrims I found faithful to their loving King. Soon I overtook a young man walking in the way, and I could see within his eyes that he was there to stay. He was faithful as a brother, he was faithful as a friend, looking for a lasting city, faithful to the end. Even when the road grew rugged and the sky turned black, trusting in his King, he had no thought of turning back. In the midst of persecution, with his dying breath, magnified the one who kept him faithful unto death. He was faithful as a brother, he was faithful as a friend, looking for